Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. It happened when I was leaving church late one afternoon this past week. The light. It was barely perceptible, but it was there. The angle, the brilliance. Over the past few months, we've been in a season of increasing darkness, which reached its nadir on the longest night. But ever since then, at first by just a few seconds, and then a few minutes, the light is returning. In the Northern Hemisphere, we have the poetic gift of having the cycle of seasons reflected in our liturgical life. You see, here in the church, we are in the season of Epiphany, celebration of the light. It's also the season of revelation, of aha moments, of opening our eyes to see God's illumination all around us. It began with the story of the Magi from the east following that brilliant star to find the Christ child. And it continued last week with the baptism of Jesus. As we heard again this morning, as John reminds us, coming up from the waters of baptism, Jesus hears the words, "You are my beloved child." It's a revelation of his heart and soul. It's an epiphany that allows him to see the world with new eyes. Seeing is one of the most powerful metaphors for this season, and it's one we hear again and again in the Gospel of John. The other three Gospels tend to focus mostly on Jesus' teaching and preaching and healing. But John often wants us to understand the power of how we see Jesus and how he sees us. Whether he's answering the door to a troubled Pharisee in the dark of night, or talking with a shunned Samaritan woman at the well, or healing a blind beggar at the gate, Jesus sees beyond whatever is on the surface to the truth underneath. And the invitation goes both ways. When Andrew and John stop Jesus on the road to ask him more about his ministry, he doesn't explain his agenda or teach them about his theology. He tells them to come and see, not just with their eyes, but with their hearts. Because how we see matters, and what we are willing to see matters. Right now, it is hard to look at the world. I get a knot in my stomach every time I open my news feeds. I'm torn between the moral obligation to witness all that is happening around us and wanting to protect my psyche, my soul, from the assault. Witnessing the violence on the streets of Minneapolis and before that, LA and Chicago, the videos of those small boats being blown out of the water in the Caribbean, the continued destruction of Gaza and the assault on the people of Ukraine, it can feel like it's too much. And these images get seared into our brains and they cause us to feel angry and helpless and overwhelmed. There's a well-documented rise in anxiety-induced mental illness in our nation. And the relentless barrage of stories of cruelty and disruption and human suffering play a large role. It's referred to as vicarious trauma, and it affects us in numerous ways. It can make us more cynical, can make us more disconnected. However, experts also tell us it can enable us to develop what they call vicarious resilience and a deeper sense of connection and compassion for others. And it is this vicarious resilience that Jesus calls us to open our hearts and to not turn our eyes away. One of the tactics of all authoritarians is to get us to doubt the truth of our own eyes. Lies become alternative facts. Passionate but peaceful protests become insurrections and riots, and violent attacks on police officers at the Capitol becomes a day of love. If they can get us to shut our eyes, to refuse to see the truth of what is happening and accept their distortions, then we have surrendered our power. Then we have given up on justice and accountability. Then we have given up on hope. But as theologian Diana Butler Bass asks us, if being a follower of Christ invites us to be his hands and feet in the world, are we also not Christ's eyes? Are we also not asked to see and name the reality that surrounds us? To face the cruelty, the suffering, the injustice that burdens so many, and to call it out as wrong. To not allow the narrative of those in power to stand unchallenged. It is a real act of courage to do that. It's been heartening to see that the response to the lawless ICE violence in Minneapolis and around the country has not been less protest, but more. It's been encouraging to see that citizens' neighbors are willing to risk their own safety to name what they are seeing loudly and fearlessly, to record it and share it with the world, to show their faces and give their names and state their values boldly. Because the only thing that can cause tyranny to fail is when those they seek to dominate are willing to pay the price and refuse to give in. But seeing through the eyes of Christ is not just about seeing what's happening around us, but also what's happening within us. When we are faced with such dramatic exposure of cruelty and injustice, it is tempting to look at it in a binary way and to resort to our corners and see it as those people and not us. To fall into the very same patterns of demonization that brought us here, and to lose sight of the real calling, the real work, which must happen first on the inside. Jesus had a really good one-liner about specks in other people's eyes and planks in our own, because that's real. It's so hard to look at ourselves honestly and see where we might be complicit in the toxicity of our culture right now, where we might be dehumanizing others and fooling ourselves, when we feel justified in fighting violence with violence, where we fall into the same comforting paradigms of good and evil and refuse to see that within every human soul lives the capacity for both. Those of us who call ourselves Christians know this well. As Franciscan Richard Rohr reminds us, far too much of religion has been about defining where God is and where God isn't, picking and choosing who and what has God's image and who and what doesn't. And that binary thinking results in the kind of extreme and indiscriminate actions that we are seeing now. Even while wearing crosses around their necks or spouting pious platitudes, this administration has decided who deserves to be treated as human and who doesn't. For there is nothing that can blind us to the presence of God so much as hatred. And that is why Jesus tells us that our human eyes will never be able to see each other clearly enough to really love each other. And it's why he repeatedly uses the metaphor of sight of the heart, because we need to see through his eyes, through God's eyes for that. It's why he says we must open our eyes to recognize the divine image not just in those with whom we love, but even in our enemies. And once we see them, we must love them. Either we see God's image in all created things or we don't see it at all, Richard Rohr writes. And once we see God's image in one place, the circle inevitably keeps widening. To include those whose lives we cannot fathom, to include those whose hearts we cannot fathom, and hardest of all, to include our own fragile and fearful selves. But if we can open the eyes of our hearts to see what God sees, we can also see what lies underneath that shame and sorrow and the darkness of the world. The grace, the beauty, the light. Because God sees the world as it really is, behind the heartbreaking facade that makes the headlines and the breaking news. God sees the world as it truly is, created out of her own goodness, not a broken place filled with fear, but as a beloved community. a family of human souls who long for wholeness and compassion and justice, and who are capable of all of that. The beloved community imagined by the ancient prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah, who described a world of hope and reconnection. The place imagined by the saints like Francis and Clare, Dorothy Day and Mother Teresa, who lived in solidarity and compassion on the margins and saw the face of God there. The place imagined by visionaries like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi and Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Nelson Mandela, who saw through the painful struggles of their time to the dream of harmony and justice between all peoples. They saw through the eyes of Christ, and they knew they could not turn away, and they were willing to lose their lives for it. They echo for us Christ's invitation to his disciples, come and see. And they knew that once we see, we must act. Go and do likewise. Because this is our time, and we cannot turn away from it. Friends, in this season of Epiphany, we believe that seeing through the eyes of Christ is not just for celebrated visionaries, but for each and every one of us. We are not just spectators to the revelations of others. We need to be on the lookout for them, to cultivate eyes and hearts that are attuned to God's sacred surprises, for they are all around us. On the streets of Minneapolis, where protesters rinsed their eyes from tear gas, in the courtrooms where judges refuse to rubber stamp justice, in the newsrooms where people continue to tell the truth, in the minivan bringing food to a neighbor who is afraid to leave their home. God is breaking through. Each one of us is called to come and see what God is doing in this dark and troubled world, to notice the growing of the light, imperceptibly at first, but steadily and true. For the light dwells within each of us. The light widens our circles of love and compassion and justice, of welcome. Jesus tells us we are the light of the world. We are all seers, and the light is calling us. What do you see? May it be so. Amen.